As I was introduced, I am the founder and director of the Faith for Earth initiative, which is part of the United Nations Environment Program that was established in 2017. And since then, we have been trying to discover ways and means in engaging religious and faith actors in most importantly, the environmental governance arena and work. So maybe just a way of introduction to the United Nations Environment Program. It is the leading environmental authority within the UN system that sets the global agenda on identified environmental issues, and we have what we call the Environment Assembly. This is our governing body, which is constituted of 193 countries or member states and stakeholders as observer members, and they come together every 2 years to decide on the priorities for the international community on environmental issues and the environmental component of sustainable development. For example, this year and last year, we held 2 consecutive assembly meetings and approved what we call the midterm strategy for UNEP that identified the what we call the triple planetary crises of pollution, climate change, and ecosystem degradation or nature degradation in general. And this is coming, as I said, identified by member states of the emergency and urgent actions that are needed to tackle climate change. It's becoming the global issue that actually is also threatening not only the environment and people, but also the security. And the Security Council 2 years ago met and identified climate change as the most dangerous security threat to humanity. And probably you've been hearing our Secretary General Antonio Guterres mentioning that this is the ultimate threat that is facing humanity in our Asian day. And combined with ecosystems degradation, the threat of or risk of the extinction of 1 million species within the next 50 years, and in addition to pollution issues that are at least killing 5 million children every year and causing a lot of health threats to the well-being of the people. All of that combined with the virus threat and the zoonotic diseases that we have been facing recently with COVID-19 and others, all of this combined together is actually is a humongous threat to humanity and to not only their health and well-being, but also to their socio and economic development. And even before we talk about these triple planetary crises, we know for a fact that 1 in 9 people go to bed hungry every night. And in a world that is characterized by being the most advanced in history, we cannot accept that fact. And at the same time, while people go to bed hungry, we have more than 30 to 40% of our food is wasted every single day. So there is a mismatch, and there is a problem really that we need to work on. But why are we getting all these challenges? And maybe also you have heard of the concept of the Anthropocene, which is the impact of humans on what is happening to Earth. We know that there were ice ages, there were warm ages, there were, some major challenges happening to Earth, but those happened over millions and billions of years. Now, since the Industrial Revolution, 200 years ago or so, we have been saying this tremendous amount of change within this short period of time in the history of humankind. And it is because of population growth, it is because of consumption patterns, and because of the extractive industry that is destroying and abusing all the resources on Earth. So all of this actually is undermined or underlined by another type of crisis, which I call the crisis of ethics and values, and which leads to this overconsumption and over extraction. And this crisis of ethics and values is characterized by the apathy, indifference, and greed. Greed in terms of we want to generate more financial well-being of countries or governments, but not the population or the people. And maybe you remember what is or what was called the Millennium Development Goals, where it focused on social and economic development, and the environment was just a marginal factor in that. And yes, some of the countries have achieved the MDGs, but on the expense of the environment. This is why we had to work on developing the Sustainable Development Goals, which have integrated environment as a key component or factor in each and every other SDG of the 17 SDGs. But again, this is people or governments not doing what they are supposed to be doing in terms of fighting the pollution or climate change or reducing the impacts on nature, is actually where it gets us to encouraging people and citizens and governments to overconsume and overproduce. And when there are no values and ethics governing the behavior of the people, then things go out of control, and we're seeing the consumption patterns and consumption mindset of people. When you buy a car, then if you get more money, you want to buy a better car, or buy a bigger car or a four-wheel drive car. So this is the consumption behavior that we have been seeing over and all over. Now, as I said, I have been focusing in integrating religious values into our environmental governance work from the perspective of the ethical approaches that religions bring into the play. And we have been seeing industrial revolutions, the mechanization or the IT and now cyber physical systems and so on. But what we actually need is a transformational ethical revolution that is based on religious values, and also, well, international values, let me say, that can govern the behaviors of the people and, of course, institutions. If you remember something called Agenda 21 that was adopted in the early 2000s and late 1990s, we were talking about the cultural component of sustainable development. Unfortunately, the cultural component was dropped off when the sustainable development goals have been adopted. It was not completely dropped off, it was integrated within the systems, but that made it as a marginal factor in driving sustainable development. In 1972, in Stockholm, the conference on human and development, the first paragraph of the Declaration of Stockholm talked about the spiritual growth of people. However, for the following 50 years, that component was completely ignored. And that component actually is part of the cultural diversity that is important to achieve sustainable development. And in addition to all of that, what I and my team and UNEP are trying to say that yes, technology is very important, but technology alone cannot solve our problems. If we have, climate change, we cannot just install solar systems and install carbon sequestration systems and capture and store and so on. Also, science is very important. Science is a powerful component in achieving sustainable development, but again, alone, without being part of an equation, a comprehensive equation that include technology as well as the spiritual and natural capital of natural systems, then we cannot achieve the sustainable development goals that we are, or the Agenda 2030 that has been approved by member states to ensure healthy people living on a healthy planet, enjoying prosperity and peace in partnership. Now, because of that, as I mentioned, we have developed the Faith for Earth initiative with 3 components that were alluded to by Victoria and Andreas, that we wanted to bring religious leaders and religious actors to the policy dialogue, to give them a seat on the table of decision making. And that is fortunately happening. When we started this initiative, we only had 1 or 2 faith-based organizations accredited to UNEP. Today, after 5 years, we have 60, and the number is growing rapidly. And it's not about the number, but it is about the engagement with policymakers. And maybe you have heard and you have seen that in each of the global meetings, whether it is on climate change, Stockholm +50, United Nations Environment Assembly, the faith community comes together and submits statements that are substantive in nature, that includes specific asks of the international community and tells them what the faith community believes should happen, and always referring to the ethical component and ethical values of moving towards sustainable development. The second objective, besides policy, is working with faith-based organizations to green their assets and investments. And the third component is bridging what I call the common understanding between sciences and scientists and religions and religious scholars and theologians. Both parts believe that we have challenges that we need to face. Both parts believe that it is part of our, it is due to consumption behavior. So we need to bring them to talk together and to integrate ethical approaches into scientific findings and so on. So now, why are we really focusing on the role of religions? Because of 2 important powers that are obvious to everybody. The first one is the convincing and convening powers. And we know that a call for a prayer would bring thousands of people to come together. And you can see it. I mean, we have been working with, for example, our Indian partners and faith leaders, and they can mobilize like this millions of people to come together and practice what is called by the faith leader. I have organized, I was asked actually to go and give a speech at a Sunday mass and in a church, and when I went there, there were 10,000 people gathered in one call for a prayer. So this is a power that does not exist even for the United Nations system, with all its programs and organizations. If we do a call, we wouldn't get that number of people that easily. and the convincing power, which is the power of the word of religions, the scripts that cannot or are not debated by the followers. They do believe in what their Bibles, their Torahs, their Qurans, their Vedas talk about, and they follow it blindly. So this is an important power. If you tell them that the IPCC report, the International Panel, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, says this, they would say, okay, scientists came up with this, and we don't believe it. Maybe it's a Western agenda, and so on. But when you tell them that your Bible tells you that you have a stewardship responsibility, they would say, okay, amen, and they would ask further and ponder how they can follow that and implement it. The power of millions of houses of worship that brings people together, almost 40 million churches around the world, 4 million mosques, and so on. These are or should be minarets for behavioral change according to faith, values, and religions. Then the economic power. The faith organizations or institutions are the fourth largest economic power on earth. They own more than 5% of commercial forests. They own more than 50% of schools and hospitals. They own more than 10% of the total financial institutions, transactions, and investments. In the United States alone, the increase of investment of faith organizations into development over the past 10 years have been 3,400%. That means they have a tremendous power that needs to be in line with the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030. Now, in addition to all that power, the power of the spiritual values that is driven from religions and religious understandings, which not only brings peace and serenity to the spirits and to the souls of the people, but also is part of the social inclusion. All religions call for serving everybody without distinction. Also, religions have been over the history managing states and part of the political system, and providing, of course, economic support to the people. Now, when we talk about coming together as interfaith community, we do not mean that we need to adopt one religion, or say that we are coming with a new religion that encompasses everybody. We are saying no, it is important to have the diversity, and you will see in a minute how the different teachings of the different religions provide that cohesion and comprehensiveness in the approach of religions coming together. So we are relying on the commonality of religions. So what I am calling for, and that was in a paper that I presented to Stockholm Plus 50 and was submitted to the Secretary General, is we need a universal ethical approach that is extracted from the different religions. Because basically, different religions are talking about the same thing in different ways. For example, the concept of stewardship that is reflected in the Abrahamic religions is actually reflected in Buddhism and Hinduism and Dharma, within the concept of Dharma, which demonstrates the responsibility of people and their duty of care. Ahimsa, for example, in Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, which represents the no harm concept, and this is the same non-violence and compassion in Abrahamic religions, and so on and so forth. The wasatiyya, or the middle way in Buddhism, is the same as wasatiyya and mizan in Islam. So many ethical approaches in the different religions refer to the same thing, and this is why we can easily come up with a universal ethical approach that I hope someday with Humboldt University, with others, with a consortium of universities, to come up with a book of universal ethical approaches or universal ethics derived from religions. So what are these elements of that correspond to environmental issues? For example, rights of the current and future generations. You know, religions, when they were established by God or the goddess or the gods, they came for eternity, for all generations to come, not for our generation or the generation to come, as Agenda 2030 calls for, but for all generations to come until, as we say, the doomsday. So this is a responsibility that cuts across generations. The equity, for example, in distribution of services is again equity in or equality and equity of the 2030 agenda. The efficiency in achieving our according to our consumption behavior per the the available resources. For example, in Islam, it says if you are on a running river, do not overuse the water, even if it is a running river, and that is the same as efficiency of the use of resources. Lifestyles, some religions actually dictate what you can eat, what you can drink, how to deal with the food, and if there is a leftover, what to do with it. Your neighbor, how to deal, and you cannot fill your stomach while your neighbor is sleeping without food. So all of these concepts are actually the same as the concepts of religions. Now, we are not talking about individual behaviors, but also institutional behaviors. And that is very important because, if we do not change institutional behavior, that will not trickle down to the individual. We need to show that it is adopted at the institutional level. And we have great examples of Laudato Si, the encyclical letter of Pope Francis, where he used the Bible and the concepts of the Bible to come with Laudato Si, which is a doctrine telling Catholics, and then it became an international movement, of how they need to ensure integral ecology by respecting the biblical principles. Similarly, we are working with the Islamic nations and Islamic scholars and institutions in coming up with Al-Mizan, which is the balance in Arabic. And it is again a Laudato Si for Muslims, let me put it this way. Depending on the teachings of the Quran and Prophet Muhammad, on the hundreds of thousands of examples and concepts in the Quran of how to deal with everything that is we are facing today: climate change, nature degradation, and so on and so forth. Hopefully next year, once we launch Al-Mizan, hopefully in October of this year, we will start working with Hindus and Buddhists and putting together similar comprehensive doctrines from their religions. And we are also working on synchronizing and extracting lessons from how these institutional documents or approaches are actually common in their approaches and so on. So we will not only invite followers of a certain religion to follow their own religion, but also learn from other religions and approaches. Again, in Stockholm Plus 50, where we issued an interfaith statement signed by 240 faith institutions, one of the main areas we worked on is what do we need the future to be, and how can we approach that? So in addition to the principles of Stockholm Plus 50 of regeneration, recovery, rebalance, renewal, and reimagination, we came up with ethical and religious principles of reconciliation between man and the creation or nature. We have to live in peace with nature. Recognition of the moral values in shaping our behavioral and consumption patterns. And then rediscovering our moral roots of behavior and how humanity and human rights should be applied. And finally, resetting the mindset from human superiority, because we believe that we are superiors to nature and nature was created for our abuse, to human humility and how we live in peace with nature and in harmony with it. And we believe this is our best last chance, because the IPCC report talks about 2 years now that we will get to the threshold of 1.5 and there's no return. And even if today all polluting or carbon emissions have stopped, we will continue facing climate change until 2100. And this is a fact, there's no doubt about it. So we need to come together, at least if we cannot do it for our generation, to do it for the coming generations. So the basic principles is that we need multilateralism, working together. We saw how when we faced COVID-19 together, we almost eliminated it. And we have found vaccinations that were distributed unequally, but were distributed to nations, and we could manage, the infection spread of the disease. So we need multilateralism, and multilateralism cannot be fully achieved without interfaith and intra-faith cooperation, interfaith between religions themselves. We need a new socio-economic paradigm that integrates environment into it as a basic component. The current development paradigm, which relies on the GDP as a measure of economic prosperity, is not enough. It has to include natural capital and spiritual capital, values and ethics into the equation of development. And we need to bring this platform for policy makers and politicians to meet with those who are driven by their values and faith principles. And this is why we are working within the United Nations Environment System and Faith for Earth to provide that platform for dialogue, for policy exchange, and so on. And we need to institutionalize the role of faith actors. And this is why we are working with some governments to adopt resolutions at the United Nations Environment Assembly, adopting faith and values into environmental governance. And we're not saying that faith values are the only values that are out there. There are some international values that have been developed over years, and that can be an addition to working together with the faith values. There have been some approaches in the past, the Seoul Declaration, the Millennium Declaration, and some religious declarations like John Paul II and Economical Patriarch in 2002. The Earth Charter, they all call about, they call for the implementation and integration of ethics in the global environmental governance system. And I hope that this was some food for thought that we need to work on. And thank you very much.